My dad turned 60 in April, and my family made sure every single person at that dinner table knew I was the one who had wasted her potential. Not in a whisper, not as an aside. Openly, the way you talk about the weather or the price of gas. Casually, like it was just a fact of life that everyone had already accepted. I sat at the far end of the table, near the window that looked out onto the parking lot. My brother had been seated next to my dad, of course. He always was. That was the natural order of things in our family, my brother at the center, and me somewhere at the edge, close enough to be counted but far enough not to matter. The restaurant was one of those places where everything is a little too dark and a little too expensive, and the waitstaff speaks in a low voice like they're all in on a secret. My parents had reserved a private room in the back. Long table, white linen, candles that smelled faintly of vanilla. 12 people total. Family and a few of my parents' close friends, people who had watched me grow up and were now watching me, I sensed, with a kind of quiet pity. I'd arrived early. I always arrive early when I'm anxious, like being there first gives me some kind of advantage I never actually use. I was standing near the door when my mom came in, and she hugged me the way she's been hugging me for the past few years. Tight, warm, but with a small exhale at the end, like the hug itself cost her something. "You look tired," she said. "I'm fine," I said. She touched my cheek with the back of her hand. "Are you eating?" That was her way. Not "how are you?" Not "how's the business?" Just "are you eating?" Which was shorthand for everything she couldn't bring herself to ask directly. By the time everyone was seated, I had already rehearsed my answers. The ones I give at family gatherings. Yes, still working on the startup. No, not profitable yet. Yes, I know it's been a while. Yes, I know Marcus, my brother, just my partner. I'd answered these questions so many times I could deliver them without flinching, which I think people sometimes mistook for confidence. It wasn't confidence. It was just practice. My brother sat to my dad's left, his wife beside him, their 2 kids on the other side of the table with my aunt. He looked good. He always looks good. There's a kind of ease that comes with being the one who did everything right. Right school, right job, right timeline. And he wore it the way people wear expensive watches, not flashy, just quietly, unmistakably there. The first hour was fine. Drinks were ordered. My dad made a toast about getting older and not minding it as much as he thought he would. There was laughter. My aunt told a story about a road trip they'd taken when my dad was 30 that I'd heard at least 3 times, and I laughed at the same parts I always laughed at, and it felt almost normal. Then my uncle, my dad's oldest friend, technically, not blood, but the kind of man who's been in the family photos long enough that the distinction doesn't matter. He turned to my brother and said, "So, walk me through this promotion. Full equity partner? That's no small thing." And just like that, the table shifted. The way a room shifts when someone opens a door and the air pressure changes. Subtle, but you feel it. My brother talked for a few minutes about the firm, about the work, about what the next few years look like. He was modest about it, which somehow made it worse. Not because I resented his success. I want to be clear about that. I never have. But because his modesty made everyone else feel the need to fill the space with even louder praise, as if they were compensating for what he refused to claim for himself. "That's the trajectory," my dad said, not quite to anyone in particular, but loud enough for the whole table. "That's what staying focused looks like." I looked at my fork. There was a pause, the kind that has weight, and my mom said, very gently, "We're proud of all our kids." It was meant to include me. I know that. But the way she said it, the slight hesitation before all, the way it arrived like a footnote, it had the opposite effect. It reminded everyone that I was there and that I represented the asterisk in that sentence. My uncle looked at me then. Not unkindly. "And you, sweetheart, still doing your thing with what was it, the app?" "Not an app," I said. "It's a platform. We help small businesses automate their client onboarding." Right. He nodded in the way people nod when they're done listening. "And that's going well?" "It's growing," I said. He made a sound that wasn't quite a word and turned back to my brother. That was the moment I always remember. Not because it was the worst thing that happened that night. It wasn't. But because it was so ordinary, so thoroughly unremarkable. Just a half nod and a turn of the head. That's all it takes, sometimes, to communicate everything. I excused myself after the main course arrived and went to the bathroom, not because I needed to, but because I needed 30 seconds where no one was looking at me. I ran cold water over my wrists, the way my therapist once told me to when I felt overwhelmed. Looked at myself in the mirror. Told myself the same thing I always tell myself: you know what you're doing, even when they don't. I believed it. That was the thing. I actually believed it. I just needed the reminder. When I came back to the table, there was a man standing near my dad's chair who hadn't been there before. He was in his mid-60s, silver-haired in a blazer that was expensive without looking like it was trying. He had the handshake of someone who'd run things. You can always tell. My dad introduced him to the table as Whitfield, someone he'd worked with years ago, before he'd switched industries, back when my dad was in consulting. Whitfield had apparently just come from another event in the same building and had stopped in to say a quick hello. He was staying for a drink. Whitfield shook hands around the table, said the right things, sat in the empty chair across from me. He was warm. He asked my dad about retirement, asked my mom how her garden was, teased my brother about a fishing trip they'd all apparently taken when my brother was about 12. Then he looked at me. "And you," he said, "I don't think we've met." "I was away at school last time you were around," I said. "I'm the daughter." He smiled. "And what do you do?" "I run a company," I said. B2B software. We help small businesses streamline their onboarding processes. Contracts, intake forms, payment setup, all automated. We integrate with the tools they're already using so there's no learning curve. I don't know why I said it plainly that time, without the apology I usually embed in the answer. Maybe I was tired of the half version. Maybe I just didn't have the energy to be small. Whitfield sat back slightly. "What's the company called?" I told him. And something happened on his face. Not a big thing, just a shift. A very small, very precise recalibration, like when you're reading something and you suddenly understand what the sentence is actually saying. "Wait," he said. He said it quietly, not for the table, just to me. "Are you the one who built the Relay integration?" "We launched that in January," I said. He put his glass down. "We've been using your platform for about 4 months," he said. "My operations director recommended it. She won't stop talking about it." He shook his head slightly like he was doing math. "We onboard about 60 clients a month. It cut our processing time by something like 40%. I felt the table go still. Not dramatically. Just still. "I'm glad it's been useful," I said. "Useful." He repeated the word like it didn't quite fit. I showed the demo to 2 other firms I advise. Both of them are in the trial period right now. He looked at my dad. "Your daughter built this?" My dad said. "She's been working on it." It was such a strange answer. She's been working on it, like I was still in progress. Like the thing I had already made wasn't quite finished yet. Whitfield looked back at me. "How many users?" "We crossed 4,000 active accounts in March," I said. "Mostly independent consultants and small law firms, some healthcare admin. We're expanding into real estate onboarding this quarter." He asked a few more questions. Specific ones, about the API infrastructure, about our pricing model, about how we were handling data compliance. I answered all of them. Clearly, I think, without stumbling. Because these were not questions I had to rehearse. They were just things I knew, the way you know the floor plan of your own house. The table was very quiet. At some point, I noticed my mom had stopped eating. She was looking at me with an expression I didn't immediately recognize. It took me a moment to place it. It wasn't pride exactly. It was something more like surprise layered over the beginning of something she hadn't expected to feel. My brother caught my eye from across the table. He raised his eyebrows just barely in a way that meant, "Okay, I see you," and I felt something in my chest loosen that I hadn't realized was tight. Whitfield finished his drink, stood, said he'd been meaning to reach out to us about enterprise pricing anyway, and that now he'd have a better reason to. He shook my hand, properly, not the way men sometimes shake women's hands at family dinners, but the way he'd shaken my brother's. He said goodbye to my parents, clapped my dad on the shoulder, and left. No one spoke for a moment. Then my uncle cleared his throat and said, "So this is a real company." It came out half statement, half question. I think he meant well. "It's a real company," I said. My aunt said, "How did we not know about this?" And she looked at my mom when she said it, which told me everything. The dinner wound down the way dinners do. Dessert came, a chocolate thing with a candle that we all sang over, and my dad blew it out and pretended not to be moved, and everyone laughed. The conversation moved to other things, but the air in the room had changed, and we all knew it, and no one quite said so. I drove home alone that night, the way I usually do. I took the long route, the one that goes past the old high school and down through the neighborhood where I grew up, past the house where I used to sit on the back porch doing homework, while my brother did his in the kitchen with my parents nearby, the light always on, voices always close. I thought about something Whitfield had said. Not one of the business questions, but the thing he said at the very end when he was putting on his jacket. He'd said, almost to himself, "You built something real." Not as a compliment exactly, more like a confirmation of something he was noting for his own records. You built something real. I've been hearing variations of the opposite for so long that it took me a few minutes of driving before the sentence settled. The hard part, the part I didn't expect, was that I didn't feel triumphant. I thought I would if this moment ever came. I'd imagined it, the way you sometimes imagine things you know are unlikely, the version of the evening where the room finally understood. I'd imagined feeling light or vindicated, or at least a little satisfied. What I actually felt was quieter than that, more like relief. Not the loud kind, just the steady kind, the kind that arrives when something you've been holding for a long time finally gets to set itself down. My phone buzzed on the passenger seat as I turned into my block. My mom. I let it ring. I'd call her back in the morning. I knew what she would say. She'd find a way to tell me she was proud, without entirely letting go of the worry, because that was how she loved, and I had stopped needing her to change that. I parked in front of my building and sat for a minute with the engine off. I thought about the years I'd spent answering questions about my company, with apologies embedded in the answers. Hedging. Shrinking. Framing what I built as something provisional, something still becoming. Because it was easier than defending it to people who had already decided what I was. I thought about how long I'd been waiting for a room to understand, and how, when the room finally did, I realized I had stopped needing it somewhere along the way without noticing. The approval felt different than I thought it would. Smaller. Less necessary. Like finding a thing you'd looked for and finding out it didn't quite fit the shape of the hole anymore. I locked the car, walked upstairs, made tea. I didn't finish. And before I went to sleep, I opened my laptop and answered 3 emails that had come in while I was at dinner. 2 from trial clients asking about upgrade options, and 1 from my operations lead with a note that read, "Q2 numbers are in. We're ahead of projection. Thought you'd want to know." I read it twice, wrote back, "Thank you. Get some rest." Closed the laptop, turned off the light. I did not need the dinner to go the way it went. I had not built anything because I wanted them to see it, but I would be lying if I said it meant nothing, that moment when the room went still and even my father had nothing to add. Not because I had finally earned their attention, because I had stopped depending on it and they could feel it, and that was the thing none of us had a word for yet. There's something nobody tells you about being underestimated for a long time. You start to internalize the measurement. Not consciously. You don't sit down one day and decide to believe them. It happens the way erosion happens. Slowly, quietly, and mostly when you're not looking. For years, I answered questions about my company with apologies already folded into the answer. I'd say I'm still building it instead of I built it. I'd say it's getting there instead of it's here. The hedging wasn't dishonesty. It was armor. If I made it smaller first, no one could make it smaller for me. What Whitfield did that night, without knowing any of this, without any intention beyond ordinary curiosity, was ask me a straight question and wait for a straight answer. That's all. And for the first time in a long time, I gave one. I didn't apologize. I didn't shrink it. I just said what the company was, what it did, what it had done. The room went still, not because I performed anything. It went still, not because I performed anything. It went still because the truth, stated plainly, has a weight that fills a space. That's cause and effect, as simple as it gets. I had built something real. Whitfield knew it. And the moment I stopped framing it as something provisional, Everyone else in that room had to reckon with the version of me that had existed all along, the one they'd chosen not to see. I think about the years between leaving my stable job and that dinner table, and I know exactly what carried me through them. It wasn't talent alone. Talent without character collapses the moment things get hard, and things got hard constantly. What kept me going was something quieter, a kind of integrity I had to practice even when no one was watching, especially when no one was watching. The decisions I made in the early months, when there was no validation coming from anywhere, when I could have taken shortcuts that no one would have noticed, I didn't take them. Not because I was trying to be noble, because I understood, even then, that the company I was building would be made of those decisions, that what you do in private becomes the structure of what you build in public. And then there was the thinking, the long hours of figuring things out, not because I'm exceptional, but because I refused to stay confused. I read. I asked questions. I sat with problems until they gave something up. Intelligence, I've learned, isn't what you're born with. It's what you develop when you're willing to be uncomfortable long enough to understand something you didn't understand before. My dad's friend didn't recognize my company's name because I was lucky. He recognized it because someone on his team had a problem and we had thought hard enough, long enough to solve it well. And then there was just the staying, the not quitting. The mornings I opened my laptop at 6 because there was no one else to do it. The version of persistence that doesn't look heroic from the outside, that just looks like showing up again and again for something no one else has validated yet. My mom called that night and I let it ring. I wasn't punishing her. I just knew that what I needed in that moment wasn't a conversation. It was the quiet of the drive home, the dark of my apartment, the simple fact of the 3 emails waiting in my inbox from people whose businesses ran better because of what I'd built. That was enough. More than enough. It was everything.